Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, I thank you all for prioritizing to share time with me as I attempt to do justice to the topic of today, to tell you what I think are the challenges of democracy and development in Africa. In 2012, I launched a book, my memoirs, entitled My First Coup d'etat and Other True Stories from the Lost Decades of Africa. The book captures my coming of age in the late 60s until the early 1990s, a period when the initial euphoria of independence had faded and we had become entrapped in a revolving door of military dictatorships, a period when Africa saw a general decline in its economic fortunes. In Ghana, the experience was particularly traumatic and saw a massive migration of many of our nationals to sojourn here with our cousins in Nigeria. It is a period during which our countries were still cooking in the governance cauldron, a kind of laboratory in which different experiments in governance were being carried out. We went through these 3 decades in which we saw brief periods of constitutional rule interrupted by military dictatorships. Ladies and gentlemen, our continent, Africa, like many other parts of the world, has gone through these leadership experiments and has been struggling to find the best solution for advancing the hopes and aspirations of our people. This quest has been fraught with various setbacks and reversals, sometimes dimming all hope that this high natural resource endowed continent will ever find the right governance mix to actualize the dreams of our people for a better life. In this short lecture, therefore, I'll endeavor to highlight a few of the challenges confronting Africa's governance and development with the hope that it will add to the ever-raging debate on a myriad of perspectives and solutions. While democratic and open governments are held up as the best system and dictatorships are frowned upon, I wish to state with emphasis that there is no one-size-fits-all system of governance. Democracies are generally preferred because of the protection of human rights, transparent and accountable governance, open government, free speech, and stability. But democratic systems also have the downside of high cost of periodic elections, the influence of special interests on elected leaders, and the general lack of a sharp national focus, in some cases because of the frequent changing of leadership and change of national development plans anytime such change happens, and also the generally slow nature of the decision-making process. Dictatorships will generally be led by a single political party, a military junta, a military or armed forces council, or whatever the leaders might wish to call it. Dictatorships will normally occur or be established after a military or civilian push. This results in the usurpation of power from the existing system, either a civilian administration or in some cases a monarchy. In Africa, the era of military coups seems to be fading into distant memory with the upsurge of democratically elected leaders. While democracy has generally taken hold in Africa, with elections being held regularly, there are still several situations in which elected leaders continue to cling to power, either by modifying their constitutions to remove term limits, age limits, or institute mechanisms that ensure that they stay in power as lifetime leaders of their nations. Democracy is a desirable ideal, and in today's world is more politically correct. It is therefore fashionable to put systems in place to legitimize even the most authoritarian of regimes. If such systems of legitimacy are difficult to implement, at least you can insert the word democratic in your country's name. And so, for example, the People's Democratic Republic of Gondwanaland, I'm not mentioning anybody's name to get into trouble. So you can just insert democratic in your name and you assume that you are a democratic government. In Africa, parallel to the rapid progress that was being made in Singapore, Korea, and Malaysia at the time, Africa also had its breed of dictators. Instead of their unchallenged rule becoming an instrument of progress for their countries, their rule saw their nations decline into abysmal depths. And I'm talking of people like Idi Amin of Uganda. I'm talking of people like Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire. And I'm talking of people like Emperor Jean Bedel Bokassa of the Central African Republic. So yes, dictatorships in circumstances are unique in increasing the efficiency of governance by reducing delays in the formulation and implementation of policies due to the absence of the need for consensus and endless debates to implement projects or policy. For instance, you take our countries, Nigeria, you take Ghana. Before a project is implemented, it must be formulated from the ministry responsible, then it must come to cabinet and receive endorsement of cabinet, and then it goes to parliament, is properly debated, you know, and assented to by parliament before eventually the project is implemented. Under dictatorships, they don't go through that. It's the dictator who decides that we must implement this project. He gives the go-ahead, and it happens. So they're able to implement projects much faster than we do in democracies. But the question we must ask is, at what price? Democracy is expensive, talking of the yearly ritual of election-related costs. Ghana's National Electoral Commission earmarked about $200 million for the 2016 election, whereas Nigeria's Independent National Electoral Commission budgeted well over $550 million for the 2015 election. But the benefit of political stability and its returns far outstrip the expenses of these exercises. The cost of transitions may be high, but the guarantees of political freedom, inclusion, respect for the rule of law, equality, protection of human rights, etc., cannot be overestimated in democracies. Apart from providing protective limits, these guarantees send a loud message to investors and other development partners as well. Any attempt to understate the benefits of democratically held elections is respectfully, therefore, a myopic perspective. Democratic elections also reduce the tensions in opposition elements' attempts to usurp power. This is because they are guaranteed an opportunity to compete with the ruling party for the general mandate of the people come elections. Normally in dictatorships, the opposition has no hope of ever coming into power, and so they think about other means which might involve the use of violence to forcefully remove the ruling party out of power. But in democracies, whatever happens, you know that in the next 4 years or 5 years, you'll get another shot to try and take power from the ruling party. Democratic governments also provide checks and balances against abuse of power and state resources, even though I must hasten to say that from what is happening in many countries, this guarantee is not always assured. Progress made under democracies are more sustainable because they are achieved by consensus and the participation of all stakeholders in decision-making. In dictatorships, progress can unravel when the object of fear, which is normally the ruler, is removed. Therefore, for the safeguarding of rights and freedoms, for the protection of the public purse, and the general reduction in the number of insurrections, Africa is better off operating an imperfect but highly effective leadership structure of democracy than to accept the high risk of dictatorial rule. Strategic interests relate to natural complementary interests in the long-term defense and geopolitical concerns. These interests are either overt or covert and materialize during classified bilateral or multilateral talks, or what in the intelligence and security environment you describe as sinister operations of foreign agents in diplomatic missions. For every portion of Africa's gold, uranium, timber, or oil, there are foreign countries that believe that it's their strategic interest and will ensure that those interests are protected. African leaders have to navigate these dangerous waters for several years, sometimes leading to the overthrow of a leader who strongly believes that he cannot allow his country's resources to be raped by foreign countries at the expense of his people. For a long time, foreign interests have largely succeeded because many African countries have not been able to entrench their national interests within their democratic institutions. They have succeeded because the quest for power often trumps the safeguarding of our national interests. I recall the decision to fight illegal small-scale mining in Ghana when I was president, and my decision to approve the deportation of some foreign nationals that were neck-deep in this brazen destruction of our forest reserves and our environment. I experienced a strong pushback from foreign interests, but that is a story for another day. I'm not going into the details.